Hey everybody, it's me, the Real Kid BC. Um, Honestly, today I just wanted to talk about different ways to start a story. Um, Honestly, the reason because is I've actually been seeing a couple different pilots lately for different shows, both from back in the day and even more recently from the early to mid 2010s. And it actually got me thinking that there's a lot of different ways to start a story. Some ways aren't really done too well, and some are. And of course, most ways to start stories aren't necessarily inherently good or bad, they just depend on how you do them. Like, the story can actually have a really good premise, but if the execution is just really poor, then you're gonna have a botched beginning, right? Or a botched pilot, or a bad start. Anyway, the point is that sure, at first maybe it seems like you're starting the story in a bad way, but at the same time, no, not really. Um, Maybe your story is just slow. Hey, there's nothing wrong with that. Stories start out slow practically all the time. In my opinion, if a story starts out slow, that shouldn't inherently mean that it's bad. It just means that not as many people are going to be able to get into it because a lot of people like really fast paced stories, and I understand that. And fast paced stories themselves can be pretty cool, but in my opinion, they can burn out really quickly if not done properly. Like a fast-paced beginning is cool and all, but if the middle is just a slog and the ending is just a slog, then it's not that interesting because, again, you burnt yourself out way too quickly at the beginning. That's not fun. No one wants to burn themselves out at the beginning of the story, which is why I like slow-paced beginnings much better. Maybe you don't, but whatever. Preferences and all that. But yeah, if you're starting a fantasy story, then you'd want to start it in a fantasy setting. Maybe, and of course, there's different ways to start fantasy stories too. But maybe the wizard is being attacked, and he chooses some boy to help him who's just nearby, and he's decent enough with a sword, and he can help him fight off some goons that are trying to hassle him, or maybe even steal his magical potions and so on. That's just an example. Or maybe you can just have a superhero story where the hero is basically just beating a bunch of one note villains, and it's the villain of the week formula. And as time goes on, the villains actually do become more powerful and more intelligent, and actually start to cause our hero to struggle and so on. Right. Of course, there's also sending your character to another world, or isekai as it's known in Japan. Actually, there's many different ways of doing this as well. They can just walk through a portal, right? Or just be summoned by basically anyone that has the magical capabilities, and you get summoned to this whole new world, which is a fantasy world. It can be any kind of fantasy world, really. Even sci-fi fantasy. Heck, maybe even a Western fantasy. Who knows? Or maybe your series is more grounded and it stars characters going to school and they don't have any powers and so on. And it starts with the main character being late to school, right? Or just needing help from his friends or whatever. That could also work, but again, it could, if done like not so well, it could lead to a botched opening or a botched beginning, whichever. Um, it really does depend. Maybe your series is about fighting, and you want to show how at the beginning the main character is weak, but with the help of their teacher and their friends and even their rival, they become stronger. Maybe it's about boxing. Maybe it's about martial arts. I don't know. There's different ways to start your story off there as well. Maybe sword fighting is involved? I don't know. It really does depend on the story and the writer. And if you're a capable writer, you're able to craft a very good story at the beginning, and not necessarily a story that just gets good after, like, I don't know, 5 episodes or 10 chapters or whatever. Because that turns people off, because they don't want to have to wait for the story to get good. They don't want to have to wait for the story to get interesting. I can understand this. I really do. Sure, I like fast-paced stories. Don't get me wrong. But at the same time, I like slower-paced stories as well. But if your story is too slow-paced, then, well, no one's gonna care. And it's going to be up to you to make things even more interesting, because you accidentally made your beginning not as interesting as it should be, or not as interesting as you think it is. So, yeah, but that's all I got for that. Anyway, there's just many different ways of starting a story. Most of them are not necessarily bad or good. It just depends on the execution. If a story is just fumbled from the beginning, then no one's going to want to watch it. But if a story is done properly from the beginning, then a bunch of people are going to watch it. So, yeah. That's all I got. Yeah, if it won't be, then you know exactly what to do. I won't hold your hand through the process. Also, I'm going to be doing more community posts. Again. Yeah. This is the Real King, signing out. Have a nice day, people, and please, try not to be toxic.